Most people spend 30 years building a career and about 45 minutes planning how to leave it. The financial industry has exactly one product for that transition: a cliff. Work full-time, then stop. That's it. That's the whole plan. And what I'm about to show you isn't semi-retirement, isn't early retirement, and isn't some productivity influencer's idea of working smarter. It's a specific financial architecture with dollar thresholds, compounding effects, and psychological traps that can add somewhere between $150,000 and $300,000 to your lifetime wealth without a single extra year of full-time work. I'm going to give you the actual numbers. I'm going to name the two thresholds inside the tax code that most advisors never bring up until you've already crossed them. And I'm going to tell you about the one psychological failure mode that derails almost everyone who tries to do this correctly. Here's what I think is broken about how retirement gets presented in this country. It was designed around a world that no longer exists. Pension plans, 30-year careers with one employer, a life expectancy that assumed you'd retire at 65, collect your gold watch, and have maybe a decade of golf before the universe took you back. That world is gone. The model built for it still here, still being sold, still quietly destroying the long-term finances of people who did everything they were supposed to do, saved consistently, worked hard, followed the plan. And the reason they're getting hurt isn't because they made bad decisions. It's because they're using an outdated map for a territory that changed underneath them while no one updated the map. What I'm going to walk through today is called soft retirement, not because it sounds gentle, but because the mechanics behind it are structurally superior to the alternative, and the math proves it every time you run the comparison. I'm going to explain exactly why the traditional retirement model was never actually designed for a 25 to 30-year funding horizon, which is what most people are actually looking at. I'm going to show you the specific numbers behind Social Security timing that most people either don't know or don't believe until they see them. And I'm going to give you a practical 4-level framework for building this transition in a way that actually works, not theory structure. Think about a light switch, on or off. That's the traditional retirement model. You flip the switch at 65, the career ends, the income stops, and now you're drawing down savings until one of two things runs out. Most retirement planning assumes the light switch, full power then nothing. But anyone who's ever renovated a house knows a dimmer switch costs $20 extra and changes everything about how the room works. You control the output. You can run at 80% for a few years, then 60, then 30, and by the time you're fully dark, the transition has been so smooth you barely noticed it happening. Soft retirement is the dimmer switch. I'm going to keep coming back to that because the people who use it are not retiring slower, they are retiring richer. And the reason the financial industry never sold you a dimmer switch is straightforward. Dimmer switches are harder to package, harder to pitch, harder to put into a brochure with a stock photo of a couple walking on a beach. They require your financial advisor to understand your actual life instead of just your account balance, and they don't generate a commission, so nobody sells them. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you two specific dollar thresholds that can lently cost you tens of thousands of dollars a year the moment you cross them, or save you the same if you know they exist. But first, let me explain why the Cliff retirement model wasn't designed for your benefit and tell you about a guy who found this out in the worst possible way. There is a guy named Robert. Robert spent 32 years as a regional vice president for a manufacturing company in the Midwest. He was disciplined, he was consistent. He maxed out his 401k every year since his late 30s, drove the same truck for a decade, and did everything the conventional retirement plan told him to do. By the time he turned 62, Robert had a solid $700,000 in savings. His financial planner ran the projections, said it looked comfortable, said he was in good shape. Robert retired on a Friday in October of 2019. Clean break. Proud moment. Family dinner at his favorite steakhouse. His kids flew in. By March of 2020, the S&P 500 had dropped 34%. Robert had been drawing from his portfolio for 5 months. He hadn't started Social Security yet because he'd heard vaguely that waiting was better, but nobody had shown him the actual numbers. He was paying just over $2,000 a month for Marketplace Hey, LTH insurance because he was 62 and Medicare was 3 years away. And his $700,000 nest egg was now worth somewhere around $460,000 with no income coming in and no cushion of any kind. Robert had done everything conventionally correct, and the Cliff retirement model failed him. Not because he was unlucky, but because the Cliff model has no shock absorbers. When you flip the switch to off and the machine breaks, there's nothing between you and the floor. we'll come back to Robert, because his story doesn't end there, and the ending is instructive in a way that bothers me more the longer I think about it. Now, here is the first thing I want you to push back on because it's the instinct most people bring into this conversation. You think the problem with retiring early is that you don't have enough money saved, but the actual problem is that you have no buffer when something goes wrong at the wrong moment. Those are completely different problems with completely different solutions. A person with $2 million saved can blow up their retirement in the first 5 years, not by running out of money, but by being forced to sell assets at a 30% discount with no income to fall back on, no ability to pause withdrawals, no way to wait out the recovery. That's called sequence of returns risk, and it is one of the most dangerous and least discussed forces in retirement planning. It's almost entirely neutralized by keeping some form of earned income during the early years of your transition. That income doesn't have to be large, it has to exist. The dimmer switch doesn't have to be bright, it has to be on. Around 11,400 Americans are turning 65 every single day right now. Every single day. This is what researchers are calling Peak 65, the largest wave of retirement-age adults in U.S. history. And according to Fidelity Research from late 2025, 61% of Americans say they intend to transition gradually into retirement rather than stop all at once. So, the majority of people are already sensing that the cliff model is broken. They're feeling it without being able to name it. They just don't have a map for how to do the transition correctly. That's exactly the gap I'm trying to fill today. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because soft retirement doesn't work for everyone by accident. There's a specific architecture to it, and if you build it wrong, you end up with a different set of problems. But if you build it right with the right income design, the right Social Security timing, and the right awareness of the 2 thresholds I'm about to name, you can add genuinely significant money to the back end of your life without working a single extra year full-time. Let me start with Social Security timing because this is where the math gets almost embarrassing. If you were born in 1960 or later, which describes a large portion of people watching this right now, here's what the numbers actually look like. Claim Social Security at 62, and you receive 70% of your full retirement benefit. Claim at 67, your full retirement age, and you get 100%. Wait until 70, and you get 124%. That's a 54 percentage point swing between claiming at 62 versus waiting until 70. And that difference is permanent, and it's inflation adjusted for the rest of your life. If your full benefit at 67 would be $2,500 a month, you're comparing $1,750 a month at 62 versus $3,100 a month at 70. Over a 20-year retirement horizon, that gap is more than $324,000 in additional income from the same lifetime of Social Security contributions, just from the timing decision alone. Nobody's saying what. It blindly. Context matters and individual situations vary. But here's the structural point. Every year you maintain earned income through soft retirement is a year you're not forced to claim early and lock in a permanently reduced benefit. Every year you don't draw from your portfolio is a year your savings continue compounding instead of shrinking. These two effects run simultaneously. Your portfolio preservation and your Social Security benefit growth are both working for you at the same time. Most retirement plans optimize one of those. Soft retirement optimizes both simultaneously. That's not a small difference over a long horizon. That's the difference between a retirement that works and one that requires you to get lucky with the market every single year. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content, otherwise YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. That's not a joke. That's genuinely how it works. Now, I want to introduce a second character into the story because she's been in the background of everything I've said so far, and her situation is going to resolve at the end of this video in a way that lands differently once you understand the full picture. Let's call her Linda. Linda is 60 years old, former HR director, 28 years in corporate. The last 12 at a mid-sized company where she effectively ran their entire people function. When she decided to transition, she didn't stop. She dimmed. She negotiated a consulting arrangement with her former employer, 3 days a week at her same effective hourly rate. She picked up 2 additional clients, smaller companies that needed fractional HR leadership at roughly $3,000 a month combined. Her total soft retirement income landed around $6,200 a month. She stopped drawing from her portfolio entirely. She's holding Social Security until 70. I'm going to tell you exactly where Linda stands right now by the end of this video, but I'll tell you in advance that it's not the story most people would write for her. But here is what nobody is telling you, and this is the part one find both critically important and genuinely funny in a dark way. There are two specific thresholds buried in the tax code and the Medicare system that can quietly ambush you the moment your soft retirement income runs slightly higher than expected, and almost no one knows they exist until they've already crossed them, at which point they are no longer planning inputs. They are surprises on a bill. Threshold number one is called the IRMA cliff. IRMAA stands for Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. In plain English, if your modified adjusted gross income in 2026 exceeds $109,000 as an individual, Medicare hits you with a surcharge on top of your standard Part B premium. The standard Part B premium in 2026 sits around $185 a month. The moment your income clears that $109,000, that premium increases in tiers and keeps climbing with income. We're talking hundreds of additional dollars a month per person in Medicare surcharges, charged retroactively based on your income from 2 years prior. So, a consultant who earns well in 2026 might get hit with a surcharge in 2028 and have very little ability to retroactively fix it. It's a trap with a 2-year delay fuse. Threshold number 2 is the Social Security earnings test. Before your full retirement age, if you've already started Social Security, benefits are reduced by $1 for every $2 you earn above roughly $24,480 per year. So, if you claimed early, maybe because you thought you needed the income, and then your consulting work picks up and you earn above that threshold, Social Security starts clawing back benefits you've already claimed. You can end up in a situation where working is actively penalized, where every dollar you earn above that threshold costs you 50 cents in Social Security income. That's not illegal. That's the design, but it's only a trap if you don't see it coming. A good CPA, who has actually helped professionals navigate these thresholds, not one who learned about them when you asked the question, can structure your consulting income and your claiming timeline to keep you on the right side of both lines. The difference between someone who knows these thresholds and someone who doesn't is easily $20,000 to $30,000 over the first 5 years of soft retirement. That's not a rounding error. That's a car. That's a grandkid's college fund. That's real money going somewhere it didn't have to go. Imagine sitting down with your financial advisor who has reviewed your plan 3 times and asking about IRMA, and they say, "I think I've heard of that. That actually happens more than it should." Amused disappointment, as I said. This is the right time to walk through what all of this looks like with a real scenario. And specific numbers because I've been throwing a lot of structure at you and I want to make it concrete. Imagine you're 58 years old. You've spent 26 years in financial services. Risk management, corporate compliance, the kind of career where your value is your judgment, not your hours. You have $850,000 split between retirement accounts and taxable brokerage. Your monthly expenses are around $6,200. You're tired in a specific way. Not burned out, not broken, but done with the performance reviews and the 45-hour weeks and the quarterly business reviews where everyone pretends the numbers don't mean what they mean. You're ready to shift gears. The question is how. Choice A is the cliff. You stop at 60. You start drawing $6,200 a month from your portfolio. You've done enough research to know you should wait on Social Security until 67. You buy Marketplace health insurance for 5 years until Medicare, which costs you and your spouse around $17,000 a year. You're fully dependent on your portfolio from day one. Choice B is the dimmer switch. You negotiate a consulting arrangement with your current employer 12 to 15 hours a week working on the compliance projects they can't easily handle. D off because the institutional knowledge lives in your head. You pick up one additional client in your industry. Total soft retirement income around $3,800 a month. You draw only $2,400 a month from your portfolio instead of $6,200. Your employer arrangement keeps you on the group health plan, eliminating that $17,000 annual insurance cost. You hold Social Security until 70. Let's talk about the portfolio impact over 10 years. In Choice A, you've withdrawn approximately $744,000 from your portfolio in principal over 10 years before a single dollar of market return is applied. In Choice B, you've withdrawn approximately $288,000 over the same period. That's $456,000 in principal preservation before market returns, before compounding just from changing how fast you draw down the account. Now add the Social Security differential. The difference between claiming at 67 versus 70 for someone with a solid earnings history in financial services could easily be $900 to $1,200 per month. Over a 20-year retirement, that's between $216,000 and $288,000 in additional income. You're now looking at a combined difference that is genuinely life-changing, and it came from a 3-year consulting arrangement. Gement at 15 hours a week. That's the dimmer switch. That's what a controlled transition actually does to the math. Now I want to talk about something that won't show up in any spreadsheet, but determines whether soft retirement actually works in practice. And this is where I think most financial advice fails completely. Not because it gets the numbers wrong, but because it ignores the psychology that runs underneath the numbers. Here is a pattern I've watched play out more times than I can count. Someone commits to soft retirement. They've got the consulting arrangement lined up, they've got the income model, they've got the Social Security delay planned, and then 6 months in, they're working almost as much as they were before. Not because anyone forced them, not because the money ran out, because identity is a more powerful force than most financial plans account for. For 30 years, your career has been answering the question, who are you? You were the VP of operations. You were the senior partner. You were the person who gets things done, who people call when something breaks. When you dim the lights, even deliberately, even wisely, a part of your brain reads that as loss, saint. Status loss, identity loss, social loss, and it compensates by creeping the hours back up, by taking one more client, by saying yes to one more engagement. Before you know it, soft retirement has become a slightly more flexible version of your old job with better hours and a lot of ambient guilt about whether you're doing enough. There's a name for this. It's called one more year syndrome, and it's not about discipline. It's a completely predictable response to an identity transition that was never actually planned. You planned the finances. You didn't plan the self. Research on retirement-related depression consistently shows it's significantly more common among people who make abrupt exits from careers that define their identity for decades. But here's the part that gets less attention. Soft retirement only solves the abrupt exit problem if you define what the end looks like before you start. Without a defined endpoint, soft retirement becomes indefinite employment with a flexible calendar and an undefined future. The fix for one more year syndrome is almost stupidly simple, which is why people skip it. Write down what fully retired looks like. Give it a date. Give it a description. Ion. What are you doing? What does a Tuesday look like? What have you stopped doing? Write it before you start the transition. Then, when your brain starts bargaining for one more client or one more year, you have a document to look at that was written by a version of you who wasn't under the pressure of the identity shift. That version of you was thinking clearly. Trust that version. Here's where Linda's story arrives at its conclusion. About 8 months into her soft retirement arrangement, Linda received a full-time offer. Good title, familiar industry, meaningful money. Her brain was doing exactly what brains do in that situation, reaching for the known, the comfortable, the thing that felt like identity. She almost said yes. She told me later it was a closer decision than she expected, but she had written down her endpoint before she started. She had a document. She looked at the document. She said no. 2 years later, Linda's portfolio has barely been touched. Her Social Security delay is on track for the maximum benefit in her earnings history. She consults about 8 hours a week. She plays pickleball on Tuesday mornings. She is by any reasonable measure winning, not born. Because she worked harder. Because she designed the transition correctly, and then held the line when her own brain tried to undo it. Robert, meanwhile, the guy from the beginning who retired on a cliff in 2019 and got hit by the COVID crash 5 months later. Robert went back to work. Not because he wanted to, because his portfolio had dropped to a level where the math no longer worked. He took a contractor role at a company his former employer had acquired. Less money, no benefits. The kind of work that reminds you exactly why you wanted to leave in the first place. He is now, as of early 2026, working to rebuild the cushion he lost and waiting on Social Security. He knows the dimmer switch would have changed everything. He brings it up, apparently, at dinner parties in the specific way people talk about financial mistakes, which is to say, slightly too often and with the particular tone of someone who has fully processed the lesson, but still isn't entirely at peace with it. Here is a practical framework for building this correctly. 4 levels. They build on each other in order, and skipping one doesn't save you time. It just creates a problem at the next level that you have to go back and fix. Level 1 is income design. Before anything else, identify how much soft retirement income it would take to cover 50% or more of your fixed monthly expenses. Not your full lifestyle, your fixed costs. If your fixed expenses are $5,000 a month, You need 2,500 in soft retirement income to be in shock absorber mode rather than survival mode. The difference between drawing 3% annually from your portfolio versus 5% over 30 years is the difference between leaving money for someone you care about and spending your last decade managing anxiety on $800,000. That's the difference between drawing $24,000 a year and $40,000 a year. A $16,000 gap that compounded over 3 decades determines whether the money outlasts you or you outlast the money. Level 2 is Social Security modeling. Pull your statement from SSA.gov right now, not next month, now. Model 3 scenarios. Claim at 62, claim at 67, claim at 70. Write the actual monthly dollar amounts down. For most professionals with a full career of solid earnings, the difference between 62 and 70 isn't hundreds of dollars a month. It's often over $1,000 a month permanently inflation adjusted for life. When you see that number 1. In actual dollars, the decision about protecting your claiming date stops feeling abstract. It becomes very, very concrete. Level 3 is threshold awareness. Know the Army cliff at $109,000 of modified adjusted gross income. Know the Social Security earnings test at around $24,480 annually before your full retirement age. Then find a CPA who has actually navigated these thresholds with clients before. Someone for whom this is not a new conversation, and structure your consulting income to stay on the right side of both lines. This is not complicated planning. It's just planning that requires knowing the numbers exist in the first place. Level 4 is identity planning. Write down what fully retired looks like and give it a date. This is the step people skip because it feels soft. It is not soft. It is the difference between a successful transition and one more year syndrome playing out indefinitely. The financial plan without the identity plan is a house with a solid foundation and no walls. It keeps you dry as long as nothing comes from the side. I want to be direct about something before I close. 10 years of disciplined, boring, low-fee index fund contributions combined with a smart 2 to 3 year soft retirement transition will outperform almost every complex strategy people spend years reading about at midnight. Not sometimes, almost every time. The compounding works, the Social Security delay works, the portfolio preservation works, the sequence risk protection works. None of it requires you to be smart about the market. None of it requires you to make good predictions. It requires you to understand how the system works, structure your exit accordingly, and hold the line when your brain starts trying to talk you out of it. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. That's not a motivational line. It's a statistical observation. The financial industry will never lead with it because there's nothing to sell attached to it. No fee, no commission, no product, no platform, no advisor relationship required. It's boring, it's correct, and it's the thing most people learn 15 years too late. 3 things to do with everything I've covered today. First, go to SSA.gov this week and model your Social Security benefit at 62, 67, and 70. Write the actual monthly numbers down and compare them. If that number doesn't change how you think about protecting your claiming date, nothing I've said will. Second, identify one specific skill from your career that someone would pay for on a project or consulting basis. Not a vague idea like leadership or strategy. A specific problem you solved at least 50 times. That's your soft retirement income model. It requires almost no startup capital, and it can cover your fixed expenses faster than most people expect once they actually price it correctly. Third, if you have a financial advisor, ask them to model your retirement with 3 years of partial consulting income included versus without it. Not as a hypothetical, as a real side-by-side comparison. If they treat that as a strange or unnecessary request, or if their Monte Carlo simulation doesn't include any earned income during the transition period, that tells you something important about whether they're solving the full problem or just the part they know how to model. The dimmer switch has always been available. Most people were never told it existed. The cliff was easier to sell. The dimmer switch requires someone to actually ask how your transition works, not just how much you've saved. And in an industry built on products, that's conversation doesn't generate revenue, so it doesn't happen. And people retire on a cliff that was never designed for a 30-year horizon. Wonder why it's harder than they expected, and spend the next decade managing the consequences of a model they accepted without questioning because everyone else seemed to accept it too. The dimmer switch is worth the extra $20. Ask for it.